Hello and welcome to everyone who has joined us this evening. In hard times like these, we definitely don't take your attendance for granted. Thank you to our amazing panelists that have taken the time to speak with us, even with everything that is going on. Finally, I would like to thank Camera on Campus for providing me this opportunity to host this event. Camera on Campus works diligently to correct misinformation spread by news outlets and on college campuses. This event is particularly important to me as I near the end of my degree and have begun to think of how I can continue with this passion, either professionally or in my personal life. Being active is more important now than ever, as we see once again the reality of how the conflict is portrayed in the international media. It's imperative that we learn how to effectively stay active against the misinformation and hate that is currently being spread. I hope you all get the tools you need from this event to continue your activism now and after graduation, as we must work together to ensure we are represented honestly and our right to protect ourselves and our citizens stops being up for debate. Please be mindful of the Q&A function on your screen, through which you can submit questions to the panelists. We recommend submitting questions as they come to you and not to wait until after the speaker finishes. Once our three speakers finish their portions, we will begin the Q&A function. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our first panelist, former member of Knesset, Michal Cotler-Wunsh. Michal was born in Israel and grew up in Canada. She received her LL.B. from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and her LL.M. from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. She is a PhD candidate in the Human Rights Under Pressure, Ethics, Law, and Politics program at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Freie Universität of Berlin, researching freedom of speech, civil liberties, democratic theories, and multiculturalism. Prior to becoming a member of Knesset, Michal served as a research fellow at the Tzav Pius, an NGO dedicated to creating opportunities to connect Israelis along the secular religious spectrum. She was also a dedicated legal advisor to the Goldin family, working for the return of deceased Israeli soldiers, Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul, as well as Israeli civilians Avera Mangistu and Hisham al-Said. Michal is committed to promoting, advancing, and protecting the rule of law, human rights, Israeli diaspora relations, Jewish communities throughout the world, and integration of old and new immigrants in Israel. Please welcome Michal Cotler-Wunsh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you everybody who's joined us and is taking time to be with us. I really very much appreciate it. And when Eitan and Sarah reached out and asked me if we better cancel because of everything going on, I want you to know that it's quite on the contrary. So there's nothing more important than creating these opportunities to engage always, and at these times in particular. I think that it's very important that we understand that is the way that we are connected. We are a people. And actually last night, I was fortunate enough to be a guest at the B'nai Zion Nefesh B'Nefesh Prize. And the Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Avera Mangistu, a longtime Jewish educator, said something that I will take with me probably for the rest of my life. And I'd love to share it with you guys before we begin. And he said the following. He said, "We are not a religion. We have a religion. And we are not a culture. We have a culture. We are not just a country. We have a country. We are a people. And as an indigenous people, this is already my part. That was Avera Mangistu's quote. As a people, as one people, that connection and is into our homeland, speaking a language, the language of the Bible, which we have too. I think that the opportunity to engage across the ocean and across the generations and across the ages in this way fills me with hope. And if I would quote one more of my favorites, and that is the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, I would tell you that this kind of hope, as opposed to optimism, is what the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks spoke about. And he said the following, that optimism is the belief that everything's going to be okay. In Hebrew, we say, yeh beseder. But hope is the belief that we have to make it okay. In that sense, optimism is quite a passive virtue, whereas hope is a very active one. And it takes no courage at all to be an optimist, but a great deal of courage to be hopeful. And I remind us all that our people's anthem is Hatikva, the hope. And so the opportunity, again, to engage with you tonight, and I look forward to hearing your questions, and please feel free to ask them later on, gives me a great sense of hope, fills me with hope, and a great sense of responsibility to know that we have to make it okay, and we have to make it okay together. So thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. And Sarah said that indeed I was born in Jerusalem, actually, and grew up in Montreal, Canada, and then served as a lone soldier in the IDF after being in Israel on a gap year program and remaining in Israel. I went to law school, actually. My first degree is from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I practiced law in the public sector and the private sector in Israel. And then I moved to Canada, where the rest of my family was. I moved to Canada with my own young family, with my husband and one baby, who was a year old at the time, who's now in the Army, to pursue my master's in law at McGill University. And I'm telling you that because it's the back and forth, it's the multiplicity of identities that I think is very important that we see as something that empowers us to have discussion across faiths, across cultures, across genders, and to reach out and to engage with other people in the task that you have. And it is an important task that we all share. But I think in many, many ways, your university experience challenges you in ways that when I was certainly my first degree at Hebrew U, and even in my master's at McGill a long time ago, I was not challenged. And I know that because my doctoral thesis, apart from what Sarah so nicely introduced, is actually a focus on freedom of speech on university campuses and the regulation of speech on university campuses. And a big part of at least the impetus for my own research was this sort of gap between speech codes that exist on so many campuses, as you can all tell me, and the concept of microaggressions and trigger warnings and safe spaces and so on. While at the very same time, Israel Apartheid Weeks take place on every single one of those campuses, usually in some sort of an opposite correlation. The more detailed the speech code, the more aggressive the Israel Apartheid Week. And that was very interesting to me in terms of understanding what it is about the regulation of speech that on one hand protects all students and on the other hand enables this lie to just take place year after year, the assumption, without even a question mark, that Israel is an apartheid state. And I take you there because it's very important that that we sort of understand that the war waged utilizing international law and its institutions and human rights discourse, the war waged that you're experiencing on university campuses is not something random. It's systematic. And I would, we could argue that it began with Zionism as racism at the UN in 1975, but even closer to where we're at today, we're about to mark 20 years to the 2001 Durban Conference on Racism, of all things, which was a hate fest against the state of Israel. And it was there that the war for the hearts and minds of public opinion, utilizing international law and human rights principles, and in many ways weaponizing them, was not only declared, but spelt out so clearly that anybody who attended that conference walked away either with complete shock or a complete, I would say, dissonance in the understanding of how removed we are or how ill-equipped we are to partake in the war that was, in fact, in the last 20 years, systematically implemented. And many of the challenges that we face today are actually all part and parcel of a very long-term process. And of course, I could name, just to name a few, the most recent Human Rights Watch report on Israel as an apartheid state. It didn't just come out of nowhere. There's nobody that should be surprised after 20 years worth of creating the equation that Israel is an apartheid state. And of course, being old enough, I would say, and having been privy to the horrendous accusation of what apartheid in fact was I know that what I experience in the state of Israel is by no means an apartheid state when 20% of Israel's students representational of, the Arab population in the state of Israel are students, when an overwhelming percentage are in medical professions, Supreme Court judge, the head of the largest bank in the state of Israel. But if you do not know what apartheid was, and you become sort of so numb to the term apartheid that Israel becomes synonymous with apartheid, and all you know is that it was one of the worst forms of crimes of humans against other humans, then I would understand why there are so many students on campuses that are so easily persuaded to vehemently hate the state of Israel. So that brings us to your challenge, and your challenges in the last few days have become very, very clear, very blatant. And I thought that maybe I would address a little bit more of that after I talk a little bit about what I did in Knesset that I think is relevant to what you do in your everyday, or maybe what you can continue to do in your futures as you engage with these issues. And the most important thing for me to say, and maybe you got a sense of it when Sarah was reading out, my bio, there is always a way to get involved. We all have circles of influence, and they are very, very important. So circles of influence at university is extremely important, but no less important are the circles of influence amongst family, friends, workplaces. Of course, if it's become, a workplace, that's okay too. But we don't have to find, work in the public sector that then enables us to advance these issues in order to actually engage in them. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, and certainly from my experience, is the engagement, and not just the engagement with groups, but the engagement with individuals. The one-on-one engagement that enables a discussion, that enables a conversation. And I'm not insinuating that you can have a conversation with everybody, but you'd be surprised that when you begin, and of course you have to be equipped with the knowledge, you have to be equipped with the facts. And if there's one walk away from my entire presentation, you have to know that there is no way to address challenges that we face without having the facts. But the more you educate yourself, and George Eliot wrote that knowledge is power. Indeed, we know that knowledge is power, but ignorance actually pulls down everything that knowledge has taken years to build in one fell swoop. And so knowledge is power, and I encourage all of you to read. And I think that's become much more difficult. Of course, we didn't have, echo chambers of, social media platforms that actually encourage polarized discussion, that maybe even enable disinformation to be spread in ways that are very difficult to detect, whether we're dealing with truth or disinformation. But you have to be able to actually sift out the facts for yourself. You have to read. There is no other way. You can't just read headlines, and you can't just read
Okay, I think there's been some technical difficulties. I think we'll move on to our next panelist, and when Michal comes back, she can finish her last statement. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our second panelist, Hillel Haifa director Valentina Komenko. Valentina was born in Russia and made Aliyah by herself in 2007. In Israel, she served in the IDF as a social worker, then studied sociology, anthropology, and human resources for a BA at Bar-Ilan University. She also has an MA in organizational sociology from the University of Haifa. Between 2016 and 2018, Valentina served in the UMass Amherst Hillel as an Israel Fellow, a collaboration between Hillel International and the Jewish Agency for Israel that places outstanding young Israelis on key North American campuses to serve as peer ambassadors to the campus community. In the past, she held various positions in the Jewish Agency for Israel. Please welcome Valentina Komenko.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's such a pleasure being here with you, especially during those times. I would say that I think it's an opportunity for all of us Israelis also to show up what's happening here and how our life continuing in the end of the day. And I would say that when I was asked to participate in this panel and this event, I saw in this opportunity basically to reconnect with my North American peers and to showcase how your support and what you're doing on campuses actually really affecting our life here in Israel, even though sometimes we're not really showing this up. So I would say that I feel really connected to what Michal said, and her quoting Avera Mangistu, who's obviously one of the inspirational person for all of us. And I really feel connected with also his quote, who some of you probably have heard during your birthright experience, maybe hearing him saying that Judaism is not a religion. And that's something that I feel really challenged, especially here in Israel, working on campus and trying to convince students and academic staff that the whole role of Hillel on campus here in Israel is basically to showcase, to provide opportunities for Israeli students to reconnect and to discover their connection to their Jewish roots. And when I'm saying Jewish roots, I'm talking about their own connection through their culture, people, traditions, and so on. And that's been a challenging piece also for myself. And that's what I see as a one of the opportunities also to bring back my own experience of being activist on American campus as well. So as Sarah mentioned before, I was born and raised in Russia. And I was really familiar with the feeling of being the minority in a majority, even though I never experienced anti-Semitism before, but I always knew that I have my Jewish background and was not sure what it means to be a Jewish in Russia of 2000. But at the same time, I felt always really committed to represent Israel in my high school. And afterwards, coming to Israel and having certain experience here it's a really similar story as Mikhail mentioned, because I also served as a long soldier and also convinced my Israeli peers and explaining them why I choose to come to Israel and serve my country through a certain way. And afterwards going to American campus and trying to engage with Jewish and not Jewish students and to try to help them to build their own connection to Israel, and for particular with the Jewish students, helping them to build their own connection with Judaism even, and to understand what does it mean to be an activist and what does it mean to be a Jewish activist on campus, and how the activists can come through over their campus period of time. And I would say that I really support what Michal said about engaging a conversation with real people. And from my perspective, as someone who came back to Israel after 2 amazing years working on American campus, it's to try to engage as many Israelis as you can and use every single opportunity, not to only to learn about stuff going on here, not just having a knowledge, but also understanding the diverse narrative that we all have here. And that's what makes, in my sense, the major connection with the real people, with the real stories. And I have to tell you that during last, let's say 24 hours since the escalation started really, really hard, I don't stop getting messages from former students and former colleagues and people all around the world, Jews and non-Jews, just asking me if I'm okay. And this feeling of support is based only on the personal connection that I was able to build when I was on campus. And the real and sometimes complicated dialogue that I was able to build, that's something that you guys can do on campuses. during your time on campuses when you're in college, but also afterwards. I can tell you that some of my former students, and I know that it sounds like I'm a Polish mom trying to, to keep in touch with all of my students, but I really feel connected still, because when I got hurt or something really happy happened to me, I would call them and I will share those feelings with them. At the same time, when they having struggles with their own life, personal or professional, they would reach out to me asking what are my thoughts related to Israel, related to Jews. I got interrupted by the messages coming up on the chat. So basically, what I was about to say, that there are so many different ways to get involved and to be involved after graduation. Some of you guys will choose to go and be a professional Jew, as I choose to continue working in the Jewish organization. And one of my main goals, I would say, reconnect with Hillel and restart working for Hillel in Israel, was specifically to bring back the voices of American Jewry here to Israel. And today, one of the ways of activism on campus here in Israel, I'm trying to put in touch and provide opportunities for Israelis and Americans, and sometimes even other Jews from other countries, to talk about certain things, to have an opportunity to have a meaningful mifgash, to meet each other and to discuss all different questions. And that's one of the ways that I choose for myself. Some of you guys will choose other different professional paths, but I would encourage you to find other ways to be active. If it's in the Jewish world, if it's, following by the need of tikkun olam, it doesn't really matter. In the end of the day, I think that the major goal of the organizations that are working on campuses and trying to acknowledge students on campuses is to make sure that you guys are going to be good people of this country that you decide to stay on, and to be connected with your people all around the world. So I think we have a lot of questions also to Michal, and also she got back to us. So I'm here with you, and I will stay for more questions, and you're more than welcome to find me afterwards on social media, and I would like to be in touch.
Thank you, Valentina. Michal, if you don't mind finishing your last statements.
Absolutely. I apologize, everybody. It's, I guess we're going to have all the challenges thrown at us, and we're still going to manage to have this conversation. So I'm sorry I'm sitting in the dark, but that's just how it is. I'm sorry that I missed all of Valentina's important, I have no doubt, experiences that she shared. And I just maybe will finish the presentation that I gave with where Valentina ended it as well. And that is the imperative for engagement and the way to engage. So if I can just give you anecdotally the opportunities to engage, and there are many, Valentina touched upon a couple of them. And I'll tell you that as recently as the last Knesset, I did not run in the last election. We could talk about that another day, but in the last fourth 2-year election, I excused myself. But in the third election that I, did enter Knesset after the 23rd Knesset, I sat on multiple committees. And on those multiple committees, the way that I chose, whether it was as chair of the Israel Diaspora Relations Committee, or as a member of the Immigration and Absorption Committee, or of the Law Committee, or of the Security and Foreign Relations Committee, or as the liaison to the issue of the ICC in the Knesset, or as the co-chair of friendship groups, for example, with Canada, and interparliamentary groups with other parliamentarians around the world. And the reason that I'm giving you that whole list is those are many examples for the imperative to engage with data-driven resources. And I started saying before that you have to equip yourselves with knowledge, and there are reliable sources of information out there, including on social media. You can, find, first of all, I promise that I update with everything that I can, including writing articles and, and everything that's out there. But there are so many reliable sources of information that you have to equip yourself with. And that enables that kind of engagement that I believe Valentina spoke about, that is so important. And not only with other Jewish students, not only with Israeli students, so that you can get their perspective on what's happening on the ground, but also, as I said before, the term intersectionality, we've got to take it back. There are students of every kind, of every color, of every gender that we need to engage with, because they have to be spoken to with respect, with dignity for difference, which we know to do. That is not only in our tradition, it is not only what we are taught to do, but it is what's most important in terms of understanding that our shared challenges, and I spoke a little bit before about disinformation, the anti-Semitism you experience perhaps on campuses, you see in your communities, that we know the importance of, for example, adopting IRA, understanding how it is that we define anti-Semitism and the IRA working definition for anti-Semitism. All of that actually enables us to expose much larger challenges that don't just affect Jews, that don't just affect the state of Israel. When I relate, including, up to last night, when I relate to the challenges we are experiencing now, we have to understand that this is not about Israel. This is about terror being able to dictate reality. And if terror can dictate reality in one democratic country, that empowers the culture of impunity and enables terror organizations to dictate reality in all democracies. So when we're able to convey messages by connecting to others, and very often that requires knowing what's known as the language of rights, the lingua franca spoken all around the world. You guys have that language of rights. You know it. You know the terms of reference. You just have to find the way to engage, utilizing the language with the individuals or the groups or the members of various groups that can actually shift, that can make change, and understand that when there is nuanced discussion, anybody who sells a black and white perspective for such a complex issue is by definition not giving the full able to have knowledge on your side, nuanced understanding, and relaying it responsibly to everybody who you can engage with. I think I'll end there so that we have time for questions, and I look forward to hearing and engaging with whoever's on the call.
Thank you, Michal. We'll move on to our last panelist, Cameron Campus Advisor Douglas Sandoval. Douglas is a writer, public speaker, and leader in the Hispanic evangelical community. A recent graduate from Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California, Douglas's passion and zeal for Zionism is deeply influenced by his diverse inner-city upbringing, Central American roots, and the desire to empower students on and off campuses to rediscover their shared Judeo-Christian roots. Welcome, Douglas.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I really, it's an honor to be with Michal and Valentina and you, and just, also by extension, being a part of the Cameron campus team. And just to kind of start off, I think the most important thing that I feel kind of is a theme that's sort of under kind of the undercurrent, right, of being in college and education is really discovering yourself and your sense of identity. And that's really a part of growing up. It's part of becoming, finding, your place in the world, the way where you want to make a difference. And I can certainly see that in my story, in my journey to becoming a pros or professional, to being a part of, coming out in full support of Zionism. And I think Michal hit on a very important point about reclaiming intersectionality, because I do think that is a very important part of finding yourself, is that a college campus is not a monolith. You're in a place with people from all different backgrounds, all different communities. Every university, at the very least, has a representation of different demographic within the country. Even if it doesn't receive a lot of international students, it's still going to represent either the city that it's in or the major cities of the United States and the various communities that are in it. And so I think that, there is a value in kind of having that finding yourself in an environment where you're with other people around, other people that are different than you. And I think that what happens in a lot of cases with Israel is that oftentimes the Jewish community isn't very understood. In a lot of these places, there's few opportunities to hear from Jews or from Zionists in a lot of universities. At least in my experience, and predominantly in evangelical universities, it's almost non-existent. Other people are the ones to represent those perspectives. So you have someone who's discovering themselves, who hears about justice, who hears about the importance of integrity and peace and all these things that they want to embody, that they want to exemplify. And then they hear, well, but Jews in Israel, they don't, their story isn't one of self-determination. It's not one of, of being of overcoming oppression. It's one of oppressors. It's one of, of taking away, of oppressing others and relegating them to second class citizen status. And so in a lot of ways, students will go into college, go into university, they'll want to make a difference they want to make a difference in the world. And then they'll come out on the other end and say, well, one of the ways that I can make a difference is by speaking out against Israel, is by calling out Israel as this apartheid state, calling out the Jewish community for supporting, crimes against humanity. And, I was taught all these things in university as I learned about social justice, as I learned about really just the principle of justice, as I learned about what it means to be a Christian in 2021, or in the 21st century, what it means to live out my faith. And, for a long time, it didn't really occur to me that there was anything wrong with this worldview. I mean, I really feel that it's become a big problem where, anti-Zionism is very much, it's very much maligned with, coming against Zionism. Anti-Zionism is seen as, as virtuous. And it wasn't until I started digging beneath the surface that I started to see, well, wait a second. None of this makes sense. I mean, I didn't know that, Israel has had, dozens upon dozens of peace offers, and, offered to make concessions to the representatives of the representatives of the Palestinians throughout history. I didn't know that, Israel does everything to, protect civilians when they're targeting, insurgents, or they're targeting people who are, looking to harm Israeli civilians. Like, I didn't know about all these things, all these omissions. And I saw all these omissions in the information that was being given, and it motivated me to want to do something about it, to want to speak out about it. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here because I feel that it's important to speak the truth. And I believe that if students are in universities and they're looking to enter the world and make a difference, the last thing they should do is to have that fueled by either normalized forms of anti-Semitism or misconstrued view of bringing justice to the world. That is the farthest thing that we want. We don't want people going up to a pulpit preaching and saying, Israel needs to not exist in order for there to be peace in the Middle East, to their congregants. And I've seen this happen on multiple occasions. Or for a professor to say, well, Jews aren't indigenous to the land. The Bible is purely allegorical. I mean, we really, it's really important, I think, for non-Jews as well as Jews to speak out and to speak the truth, because the truth is the truth. And people need to hear the truth. It doesn't matter where it comes from, but it's important that it gets out. And so that's why I'm here. So happy to be on this panel, really honored. And Sarah, I don't know if you have any more questions for us, if any questions have rolled in just yet, or if you have some questions to pose to any of the three of us moving forward.
Thank you, Douglas. That was really great. I really appreciate it. Lots of stuff I never thought of before, so thank you. Okay, so our first question goes to Michal Cotler-Wunsh. What is the most effective way to advocate for Israel during times of heightened conflict?
Okay, so here we are. We're in it right now. We're in the thick of it. I'll tell you a few things anecdotally and a few things sort of theoretically. In times of conflict, what happens is an exacerbation. I'll start with the theory, an exacerbation of what's always there below the surface, bubbling just below the surface. So very oftentimes, and that's why before I referred to the IHRA definition for anti-Semitism, IHRA. So when you think of COVID-19, for example, that gave rise to this tremendous wave of anti-Semitism, actually on digital platforms. If some of you were exposed to COVID-48 and to, a whole plethora of accusations of Jews spreading COVID-19 and so forth. Well, that is an indication of what's, as I said, usually bubbling below the surface, and there is something that happens. It could be COVID-19. It could also be, the last 24 hours that began actually, and this is where it's important that we zoom in from the theory and gather information before we engage. So that you are going to be up against a larger challenge when something happens like the last 48 hours. But where is it important that you empower yourself, and where is it important that you engage, is to begin to connect the dots. So Hamas is a genocidal terror organization hell-bent on the destruction of the state of Israel. It is, in fact, subjecting its own citizens, 2 million citizens in Gaza, to a terror regime. It is launching rockets in the midst of a very densely populated civilian area. The state of Israel, and as Douglas referred to it before, actually takes tremendous care to warn Gazan civilians that there is going to be an incoming rocket to destroy the infrastructure from which Hamas is challenging all of us. And I can tell you last night, millions of Israeli civilians, Arabs, Jews, Christians, Buddhists were in shelters. Several were killed. Many were injured. And when we talk about injury, and this is something that barely gets spoken about, we usually talk about bodily injury, about physical injury. And I can tell you that there's a second generation of children. So there are parents that grew up as kids in the South with PTSD, and now they're raising their own children with PTSD because of the number of nights that they spend running to shelters. And when they hear a door slam or a car, make a funny sound, then they are certain that there's an incoming rocket. That is not acceptable for a terror organization to manage reality and at the same time receive support from the international community, not be challenged because there's this constant moral equivalency. I'll give you an example. Both were concerned, both sides need to de-escalate. Both sides need to de-escalate assumes that there is a moral equivalency between a law-abiding democratic state, which, as I said, not only protects the life of its own citizens, Arabs and Jews and religious and secular and Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and women and men and everyone, but it protects the lives of the citizens. And the moral equivalency places the same rules on that democratic law-abiding state and on a terror organization that not only violates international law principles and human rights, but actually takes advantage of the benefits, so to speak, that the international legal framework affords it. For example, with humanitarian aid that flows into Gaza regularly. Now, when we engage in a conflict such as the one that we see or an escalation in conflict, because we're in a perpetual conflict, there's not going to be resolve in a conflict with a terror organization. There cannot be resolve in a conflict with a terror organization that is, when I say genocidal, it's in its constitution to destroy the state of Israel. And when the very legitimacy, the very right to exist of the state of Israel to exist is questioned, and there is no question mark there because there's no other country in the world whose very right to exist is questioned. So the state of Israel has become the proverbial Jew among the nations. and the morphing of anti-Semitism, the mutation of anti-Semitism that enables the state of Israel. And actually, Douglas referred to it, anti-Zionism, to be synonymous with anti-Semitism. And that's why the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism is so very important. A 20-year democratic process, a consensus definition that you have to familiarize yourself with, which includes what we know as the 3 Ds, the demonization, the delegitimization, and double standards against the state of Israel. And I, as a lawyer, an international lawyer, speak very much to the issue of double standards, because double standards do not only harm the state of Israel. Double standards undermine the very laws or rules-based order that international laws were meant to provide. And so for that, we have many examples. And you have to prepare yourselves and have the resources that you know you can turn to have the information you need to be able to respond to tough questions. And I'll tell you something. And I want to connect to what Douglas said with one last sentence. It's an amazing opportunity to be a university student. Never in life again do you have the opportunity to just learn, so purely, just learn. It's a tremendous thing to be able to do. And if you maximize the time that you are at university to build that base, to create that sense of identity that Douglas was talking about, you take that with you wherever you go, as I always tell my kids. You take yourself with you wherever you go. And that actually prepares you for life, whatever it throws at you, personally, professionally, academically, in every realm. It prepares you better. So it's not just some altruistic need to get engaged, but it will actually serve you as well to engage in this way.
Thank you very much. I think we'll start and we'll go with one more question for Michal. And the rest of the panelists, if you all want to chime in on this afterwards, I just know Michal maybe has to leave a little bit early. Okay, so you mentioned a lot about educating yourself and how important that is. So one of the attendees wanted to ask you, as a beginner, where would you suggest somebody begins to educate themselves? They feel very passionately and strongly about the subject, but they don't know where to get their facts from.
So I'll tell you the truth. Look, I can, tell you, go and read history books, but most likely that's not going to happen. So I'm going to be realistic and say, there are good news sources like the Times of Israel, like the Jerusalem Post, that are giving you a lens that if you don't have enough information, they're not giving you their opinions, they're giving you more of a factual description. There are more sophisticated sources of information. So, Haaretz also prints in English, but Haaretz articles are often rife with a personal opinion of whoever's writing them. The Times of Israel is much more likely to give you a little bit more of a balanced understanding of what is happening on the ground. And, with time, you find a few of your, I would say it's actually almost, it's not personal because you don't have to know them, but you find reliable sources, you find reliable writers. So I have a few that I know that I follow not only for their regular updates, but actually I am interested in their opinion. And one of the things that's happened over time, certainly with digital platforms and social media, is we're all the media, right? We're each the media. We can all be the media. And so you have to use a lot more judgment, a lot more discretion about who you're consuming, because knowing that each of us can be the media, wow, that is incredibly powerful. But it comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility not to take advantage of that. And that is, the first homework that you have is to find 1 or 2 writers that you want to follow and that you like their voice, and begins to equip you with knowledge so that you can begin actually making up your own mind about what it is that you see on the ground, about, and maybe even, differentiating yourself from that particular writer. But that is what I would begin to say. And of course, the mother in me also says, read books too, because history books are really good. They give very good perspective. And we can even compile a list of books that I'm sure Camera could begin to suggest if that would be relevant.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question is for Valentina. Okay, sorry. Many Hillels in the US try to create an open space for people of all faiths to come and learn about Judaism and to help build bridges. Is this something that Hillel Haifa is working towards as a mixed city?
Before I will answer to this question, I want to add on top of what Michal said. I think that I also want to encourage you to challenge yourself and go to diverse voices, and to try to read those who you're not particularly agree with them, but try to also to see the multiple views on the same topics, and then understand the complexity of the situation that's happening. And I would also say that it's super important to understand the background that each of writers are coming from, so you can understand actually what some consensus those people are coming from. So in terms of your question to me, and the mission of Hillel, I would say in terms of providing the safe space and collaboration with a diverse population of Haifa. I have to tell that one of my personal and professional challenges is to make students being involved in Haifa as a city. There are a lot of students who are not really interested in getting engaged with the local population. A lot of students, especially from Technion, are coming to study in Technion. And if Technion would be in Arad or in Sderot or in Eilat, they will go there. They're not coming particular to spend their time, their 3 or 4 years here in Haifa. And that's one of the challenges they have to work and try to encourage them to get to know better the system and the city that they live for. And on campuses, again, it's really hard. Think about the reality that we all live here. Sometimes for most of the Israelis, the first time that we're getting to know the diverse of people, I'm not talking about the other Jews that we meet during our army service. The first meaningful experience with Arabs sometimes happens on campuses. And a lot of our population here in Israel don't necessarily familiar with the Jewish history in Israel. They don't necessarily good in Hebrew. And a lot of times there is no platform for us to engage with them. A lot of times we're sitting in the same classroom talking about the same issues, the same things, but don't have an opportunity to ask if a person who sits right next to us, where they're coming from, what they feel about it. And that's one of the things that Hillel as an organization on campus trying to provide. And when I'm talking to the Jewish students who are trying to also to understand what does it mean for them to be Jews on campus in Israel, in Jewish and democratic country. At the same time, when we have all the system around us, all our lives is based on Jewish tradition, Jewish holidays, Jewish language, all around us is Jewish from one hand. From another hand, it's super hard for us to find our own way and connection to the community that we have to. So think on top of that, this feeling of not really feeling connection to my own identity, to reach out and to approach different person, to be open and to learn about me, and for me to be interested enough in learning what they feel, it's super hard. And that's the reason that we try together with other communities on campus. And if we're talking about Arab population, and when I'm saying Arab population, it's Muslims and Christians and Druze on campuses, and all different categories of students who are sometimes religious or political, and not necessarily have opportunity on campuses here in Israel to express their voices. They just don't have enough space for doing it. So those are challenges that we're dealing on daily basis. And I would add on top of it, the experience that I had today coming to campus and trying to see what's happening and what students feel right now. And there are a lot of tension between students. And this tension also comes on top of endless opportunities to learn about each other. especially for students who has been going through the last year of studying online and not having social opportunities to get to know each other. So yeah, I hope I provide a good response to your question.
Thank you so much, Valentina. And we're next going to move on to a question for Douglas. What should students do if their universities issue statements about the current escalation that demonize Israel or create a distorted picture of what's truly happening?
I think the first thing is to take a breath. It's very easy to look at something like that and get, triggered, to get upset. I know that for me, I find a lot of the same rhetoric to be, at first, when I started doing this work, I found it to be very offensive, but now I actually find it to be quite boring because it's almost never original. It's usually something that's been recycled, something that I read 7-8 years ago. I think I saw we were talking about it over email, talking about a couple of a lot of the posts we were seeing, and someone mentioned a tweet by The Onion about a Palestinian soldier, talking about how he was, he was valiant in taking out a Palestinian child, and I'm like, I saw that article 3 years ago, but here they're pulling it out of the hat again. So I think the first thing is to understand that a lot of the rhetoric is repetitive. A lot of it has been debunked largely. I have to just give a huge shout out to Camera National, our parent organization, for all the for their diligent efforts at just addressing these issues. Every time they come up, I actually am really always I'm so encouraged by how they just seeming, even though the onslaught of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic rhetoric it just seems to be unceasing. They just continue to churn out rebuttals and articles debunking these points. So that said, my next advice would be, after you've had a chance to take a breath, to catch your breath, and it's to go ahead and find the truth. Begin that journey of what are they saying, what claims are they making, and how much what is the veracity of those claims? What is the veracity of those claims? And most often than not, you'll find that a lot of it is just completely made up or anecdotal, things that just can't be, like, they'll say, well, a lot of Palestinians were killed today. What does that really mean? In what context? How did that happen? Were they combatants? Were they civilians, human shields, used by Hamas, or by other terrorists in the West Bank? And so I think that's important. Visit camera.org, visit Palestinian Media Watch, visit these major organizations that have dedicated themselves to visit the websites and use the resources from these major organizations that have set out to debunk a lot of the misinformation that's out there. And don't just sit there and say, okay, well, I can sleep at peace now, knowing that what they said wasn't true, but actually do something about it. Go write an article, become a Camera Fellow, and host events on your campus with engaging, and well-read and educated speakers. Write op-eds through the fellowship. I work with students on a regular basis to debunk these claims, and we make a difference because we're introducing a different voice into that discussion. When that student publishes that op-ed in the campus paper, he's saying, well, look, this isn't the full story. Let me give you context for why this is happening. And so that's super important. I think don't just be well with, sit with the information that don't just sit there and just say, well, it's been debunked, so I'm at peace now. but feel encouraged, feel empowered to speak out so that other people, who are maybe spectating, maybe they don't have a stake in the game, but maybe they might be a little sympathetic to what they're saying, to what, these detractors often say on campus. Who isn't going to be sympathetic to the notion of the violation of human rights, right? Everybody is going to say, well, that's horrible. That's a tragedy. That's, we need to do something about it. But, the important thing is that, that as students, you're in a position to make a difference, and that you recognize that, and that you do that when you have a chance.
Thank you so much, Douglas. We're going to move on to our final question to Michal. This question was asked by Laura Kessler, one of the attendees. Michal, any career advice for an older Gen X professional student transitioning into a new career in Jewish advocacy? How can we help, and where should we go where our age and experience will be an asset and won't be used against us?
So I would actually flip the question and say, and maybe borrow where Douglas ended. That is a source of empowerment. None of that should be used against you. And I think that we have tremendous power when we believe in ourselves, in our ability, and in the responsibility that comes with that ability. To know that from that place of empowerment, we're not only led to, what Douglas said, after taking that breath and informing ourselves, to actually motivating us to action. Look, we're at a very interesting historic intersection where I believe that there are global processes intersecting with internal processes within, the Israeli society that I think Valentina spoke about, and in the general, Israel diaspora relations piece and the challenges that we have. And the intersection between those three issues, internal Israeli resiliency, Israel diaspora relations, and Israel standing in the international arena, finds us at a time of tremendous challenge and opportunity that comes alongside it for each of us, like Valentina, like Douglas, like Sarah, like everybody here this evening, to make a difference. Now, that is a really meaningful thing to say, that in our lives, we can have impact, that in our lives, we find the way to make a difference. That's not something that I take for granted. That's not something that I think everybody in the world can say. That is something that when you look at people's sort of challenges in life, it is very often because they haven't found their inner voice. And that certainty that you can make a difference, that's all you need to have, the certainty that you can make a difference, that each one of us, each one here is a change agent. And in order to become that change agent, you just have to believe in yourself and to listen to that inner voice. I think that that's where your answer is. And there are so many opportunities, because in the intersection of those challenges, and I wanted to say one more thing with regard to the state of Israel and its challenges. And I remind this to people, having grown up in Canada myself, and certainly you could say this about the United States. Israel is 73 years old already, but it's also 73 years young. We are in a process. We are an indigenous people returning to an ancestral homeland after millennia of exile. It is not a simple task to redefine sovereignty, to redefine peoplehood, when some of us are living in that ancestral homeland and some of us are living all over diaspora, and we're engaging with Jews and non-Jews here and abroad as the majority with a minority and so on. And so I think it's super important that when you recognize the entire what will I call it, matrix that each of you has in terms of the issues that motivate you and interest you, there is nothing that you can't do in terms of making a difference and making impact. You just have to find the way to sound your inner voice and have the confidence to believe in yourself that you can make a difference and have impact. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to have another Zoom for the technical challenges. And I look forward to future engagements, and I'm always available really to all of you for specific questions, for resources that I can refer you to. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to engage in this way. And as I said, be filled with a tremendous amount of hope that everybody that's here this evening cares enough to engage in this way.
Thank you. Again, thank you to all our panelists for your time. Thank you to everyone who participated. I know some people had to leave Zoom early because of sirens, and that's obviously completely understandable. So thank you so much for everybody who came with all the difficulties and the challenges. This event was recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording on the Facebook event. Thanks again, everyone. I hope we meet again under better circumstances, and a good night and a quiet night for everyone.